Okay, let's see what you guys said about these questions. Number one, the film's cinematography, the quality of the image. So the group that took this question noticed a few things. They noticed that the angles are often low and weird and are not always focused on something that we would usually consider important. And the reason could be that this angle is from a child's perspective. So we have lots of low angles. We look at lots of like details on the edge of rooms. Um, and the image quality is also very grainy, very low quality, low resolution. And this makes it hard to see things, especially with low lighting, which is a lot of the time. So you put these two together, and what happens is the visual presentation is very low information. What we see does not always immediately make sense. And so this group says this is how the film tries to create like a scary atmosphere. It also connects back to um, younger childhood nightmares when we dream of things that don't make sense and we don't really see uh, what's really happening in our dreams. Yes, all of these do make sense. I want to add one more idea though, which is if you combine darkness with grain, the image is always moving. There's always something happening in the image, right? When we look at total blackness, things are popping. And sometimes the film will gradually show us something in the middle of this darkness. And because of the grain, because of the image that's always like jumping around, it sometimes takes a little time for us to realize that the film is showing us something. So in fact, it's not just black, it's hiding things using the film grain, which adds to this group's answer that it's not easy to see what's going on. The second question is about the sound design. The group that took this question noted that uh, there are sounds from many objects in this film. They mentioned the TV. We'll get to the TV later, but like the music of the TV is always somewhere in the background for many of the scenes. The sound of the telephone is also quite prominent, whether it is at the near the beginning when Kaylee tries to use the phone and the line is dead, or near the end when Kevin calls the police um, and it goes through, but we don't really hear the sound of the police officer. We only are able to hear the sound of somebody talking from the phone, and we have to read what they say. And then finally, this group mentioned the toy telephone near the end. Um, so like after Kevin uses the adult phone, then we later on we have a very brief, quite scary shot of the toy phone ringing as well. This group says that that shot is connected with their idea that in this film, the children, Kaylee and Kevin, are dead. And so Kevin is slowly leaving this life. And so first he has the adult phone and then he has the toy phone as a symbol of like he's leaving this world. They also mentioned that in many scenes, especially scenes with cold lighting, like blue lighting, there's a background humming noise, like ong, 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 that kind of noise, which is a good catch because we're watching this film in a classroom with air conditioning that also gives a humming noise. So sometimes it's a little hard to tell the difference. But yes, in many scenes there was a humming noise. And according to this group, it's a reflection of like the nightmarish, like afterlife quality. It's a horror sound. That's what they called it. As a signal to the viewer that something strange is happening. Question 3. Well, no, I should say more about question 2. So aside from these sounds, we also have the sound of objects moving around that we cannot see. So unusual for most films, in this film, the sound design also gives us information that we cannot get another way, right? We don't see it, we only hear it. And the fact that we can hear it, but we can't see it also makes it kind of scary. And finally, sometimes we see on the screen subtitles, but we don't hear the sound. And that is also kind of scary because it means that somebody is talking that we can't hear. So all these are part of the sound design. Question 3, the role or function of the television. So the group that took this question pointed out the television has a number of roles. First, it is often the main source of light. So on a very practical level, in terms of filmmaking, you always have to think about where does the light come from? Why is there light? So having the TV on solves that problem for many scenes. We can see things or we can see parts of things because there's a TV on somewhere. The sound of the TV we talked about earlier. The image on the TV, so it's usually playing cartoons. This group mentioned that there often seems to be connections between what's going on in the cartoon and what's going to happen in the film. So the main example is when the rabbit makes itself disappear. And we see that like 7 or 8 times, and then we see a toy snake also disappear. And this is connected with other disappearing things in the film, like the disappearing toilet, the disappearing doors. At one point, there is a disappearing window. But there are also some other connections as well. Or sometimes it feels like there is some kind of connection between the cartoon and the film. Maybe the filmmaker intended these connections. Maybe they are connections that we, the viewer, make when we're watching the film. But it does add a sense of something else is happening, some kind of like foreboding or ominous atmosphere. And then one more thing this group said about the TV is that it also gives us a sense of safety. As mentioned earlier, it is one of the most stable sources of light in the film. The children see the TV as a source of safety. They see the living room as a relatively safe space, right? They go away and they come back. And the cartoons themselves are also familiar to these children. They know what these cartoons are. Kevin likes to watch them. So it feels like a sense of safety, but you can also say that it's a distraction from danger. Both children know that something strange is going on, but as long as they have the TV to watch, they don't have to think too much about those problems. All right, question 4. Is there a monster? So the group that took this question says yes. And they describe it as a shadow, in the sense that it doesn't have a concrete body. It seems connected to the children or connected to the house. And in fact, we can even think about it as the traditional children's monster under the bed, monster in the closet, monster in the basement, monster in the dark. A monster that the children never see, but often feel like there must be a monster there. That's the monster in this film. And it's scary because, first of all, it can move things around, move around objects, make them stick to the wall, make things disappear. Near the end of the film, it makes Kevin walk on the ceiling. But it's also scary because it doesn't have a sense of adult authority. It never says, it never like explains things. It when it gives orders, there are very strange orders. Go upstairs, go down, go to the basement, put a knife in your eye. I want to play. It's scary also because it's hard to picture what kind of personality this monster might have. It's very unpredictable. Doesn't seem to fit our understanding of ordinary people. Now, If there is not a monster, this group says that maybe it's the mother and father talking to Kaylee and Kevin, and the mother calling her to go upstairs, the father calling Kevin to go downstairs. So how would this group explain like the weird things that the monster sometimes says? Well, the orders, right? Come upstairs, look under the bed. This is more common. Adults don't always explain things to children. Children are expected to just follow adults. But the weird things like, I want to play too. Okay, so like maybe sometimes your parent wants to join you in playing whatever game you're playing, and it turns out they're not very good at it, or they're not very interested, or they don't understand the game like you do, and it feels kind of weird. And then finally, put a knife in your eye. This is the hardest to explain, but I think we can connect it to like mental illness. Uh, and even if the parents are not mentally ill, sometimes parents will do things that surprise their children, and that could also feel scary. So maybe this is like a metaphor for a parent saying something strange. Not necessarily put a knife in your eye, but like do something that the giving an order to a child to do something that the child doesn't really want to do, or it feels like to the child it feels like they're suffering. Like I don't know, go do your homework, right? That's an order that you don't want to hear. Question 5, what's actually happening? So one answer I heard is near the beginning of the film, the father says Kevin hit his head. So maybe the film is showing us the world in Kevin's mind after he's unconscious in a coma. And so according to this answer, it's scary being in a coma. You get signals from the outside world, but they don't make sense. And you're alone inside your own head. And so what we have is a very nightmare logic of how Kevin experiences the world while he is unconscious. Could be. Another answer I heard is that Kevin and Kaylee are dead and that they are slowly leaving behind this world. And everything we see and hear are um, the things that they remember the most in a kind of inverted logic, because now it is no longer part of their world. They are no longer part of our world. So things don't really fit together anymore. And it ends up feeling like a nightmare. Personally, I think there are probably two things happening. First, Kevin did hit his head. And secondly, I think his parents are getting a divorce. When Kaylee goes upstairs and to see her mother, she says, "Your father and I love you very much." That feels like something you would say if you're getting divorced. So um, perhaps what we're seeing is the emotional impact of uh, the younger kid getting hurt while the parents are having a large disagreement that the children know could change their family forever. They may not know exactly what a divorce means, but they can feel things are changing and not in a good way. Um, and so when the adults disappear, are they in bed asleep and we don't see them because the kids are having like a nightmare? Or have they left to, I don't know, negotiate or have an argument outside? And so the children literally can't find the adults. Either one could be, right? There are many different ways to make sense of this movie. Question 6. This group didn't come today, so um, I'll talk about these. So, like many things in this film have a symbolic meaning. The most obvious ones are look under the bed, which is where a monster often is. Go down to the basement, which is where a monster often is. But you also have like shots. There's a very commonly repeated shot of the TV hitting the door, and behind the door is a shadow, and the shadow keeps flickering because the TV light is flickering. Shots like these remind us that light and shadow go together. If you don't have a light, you don't have a shadow. So when you have a strong source of safety, you also have a greater danger of losing that safety. We can apply this to parents. When kids are very young and they love and depend on their parents very much, the idea that they might lose a parent because of divorce or some other reason can be very, very scary. Light and shadow. And then we also have the symbolism of toys. Toys are objects that children use with their imagination to tell stories. But if the toys are characters in these stories, does that mean that they have their own personalities? Do they have their own lives? Could a toy in a children's story get out of the child's control? Could a child lose control of the story that they're telling? That could be one reason why we have so many shots of toys that end up being kind of scary. Cartoons as well. We look at cartoons, we think they're silly and fun. But if you really think about like what happens when a cartoon character punches another cartoon character, like a lot of cartoons are actually quite violent. So there's also darkness there. Um, the idea of like things going topsy-turvy, the ceiling is the floor is the ceiling, the toilets disappeared. Look, lots of things happen in a child's life that a child does not understand. And I think those are examples to show like, oh, what if they're redesigning the house? And a child's usual sense of space no longer works. They no longer feel at home at home. So those are some possible symbolic designs. And then finally, question 7, the group that took this question said, yes, the film is scary. And the film is a horror film because the film tries to be scary. And it's not the same question because sometimes horror films try to be scary but fail, but they're still horror films. Uh, so I think we also have like we can talk about what does it mean for a film to try to be scary and fail. How can, if we're not scared, how can we tell that the film is trying to scare us? Because it uses a lot of existing film grammar, the way that it gives us information, the way that the camera moves, the way that it uses sound and music, the stories that the film tries to tell, the use of symbolic darkness and fears and nightmare logic. All of the things we've been talking about in the earlier questions are elements commonly found in horror films, and also like the use of monsters and unexplainable dangers and the lack of a source of safety and help, the sense that you can't solve this problem by yourself, that it's a bigger problem than you are, that than you can handle. All of these are common to horror films, and so even if they don't make you feel scared, you can still say that it's a horror film. It's this kind of film because it has these kinds of elements. Now, I was talking with another group and they said this film is not scary. And they can tell what the film is trying to do, but they feel like it moves too slowly. Whereas you can also say that because the film has 3 jump scares, you don't know when they're going to come. So after the first jump scare, uh, the slow pace of the movie makes it scarier because anytime something could suddenly jump out at you. Okay, do you have other thoughts on this film? Okay, next week we're going to watch a film that one of your classmates recommended. See you next week.